Let's create a Node.js server that returns the top stories or the front page stories from the New York Times. As you can see here, I'm sitting on a Raspberry machine, but you can think of it as the equivalent of a vanilla Ubuntu machine. So we'll go through the commands and the steps that would be identical to those on an Ubuntu machine. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll go from the ground on up. Think of this as a clean machine, and the very first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to install Node.js. I'll do that by entering sudo apt-get install, and then the name of the package, which in this case is Node.js. We'll go ahead and hit return. And we have made the installation. Let's go ahead and create a development folder. So you can see here I'm working at the root, and I'm going to create a folder called dev. Inside of it, I'm going to create a folder called NYT for New York Times, NYT. And we're going to move inside of it. And now we're going to go ahead and init our Node.js application. This is a part of Node.js that gets packaged, and all it does is that it creates some metadata for us, some default configuration that once we start using NPM, the Node package manager, will look for. So let's go ahead and do the init. All we do is we enter npm init. And it'll guide us through a number of questions. As you can see here, I'll go with the defaults. The name will be NYT, the version 1.0, and I will say here simply a service to return NYT front page news. Okay. Entry point will be index.js, and for the rest, I will simply hit return for each one, with the exception of the license, which I won't enter this NYT. I will then confirm. If we list our files, we'll see that we have a package.json now. And if we look at it, you can see there that the information we just entered is now the configuration or the init for this simple little application that we're going to write. The next thing that we're going to do is that we're going to install the modules that we're going to use. For that, we enter npm install, and in this case, we're going to need Express, which is the most widely used web framework that can be used with Node.js. Next, we're going to install a feed parser, and that's simply because most feeds, as we will see, the one from the New York Times is no different, come back as XML, and we want to be able to parse that into JSON. So I'm going to go ahead and install that. So we're now ready to write the application, but before we get started with that, we're going to create a simple test file just to convince ourselves that we've installed everything correctly and that we can access the service externally. So we'll go ahead and create a file. We'll call it test.js. We will then open it using the nano editor. And the very first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to create an instance, or we're going to create an instance of the Express module. We're going to require that, and then we're going to reference it by simply denoting the name. Afterwards, we're going to create an instance, and we'll put that into an app. So we will enter Express and invoke it, as you can see there. Now, the next step is we're simply going to use part of the framework of the functionality that Express uses, and we're going to enter here get, which is for the HTTP GETs. This is the typical request that you make on your browser, but in this case, this is the server side that is responding to a request. And this is simply going to be the root, so we enter there just a slash. Then we're going to write a function to handle this, and this function has two parameters. request and response. As you can see there, we're then going to close our function and close the parentheses that correspond to what we have after get there. Now inside of it, we're simply going to respond to the requests by sending a message back to the client, as you will see in a minute, and we'll simply say hello world. I'm going to close it with an exclamation point there and put a semicolon as a line terminator. Now after this, all we're going to do is just simply listen to requests, and that's part of Express as well. All we need to do is to enter the number of the port that we wanted to listen in. And for this case, we're simply going to enter 3081 as a port. So that's all we have to do to create a small little server using the Express framework on top of Node.js that responds with a hello world when it is invoked by a client. So let me go ahead and close this. I'm simply going to save that file. If we take a look at it on the file system, you can see there that the code that we just wrote is now being listed. Let's go ahead and clear the screen here. Now let's go ahead and run that code. We do that by entering node, name of the file, and as you can see there, the application is now listening. So I'm going to go ahead and bring a browser. I'm accessing this from the outside, and I'm simply going to enter here the path. As you can see there, I typed apricot.nyt.edu and the port number, which in this case is 3081. If all goes well, we should see hello world coming back. Yes, as you can see there, we got hello world. That means that this is now globally accessible on this address and at that port. So we know now that we can write applications that are accessible from outside of the machine. Okay, now that we know that works, let's go ahead and write the code for the service that is going to return the feed with the New York Times top stories. So I've written that beforehand. I'm going to go ahead and show you here the editor. As you can see, we start off with the same thing we did before, where we create an instance of Express. Now we are also requiring the feed parser that we installed as we got started. I'm then listing here or putting into a variable the address from which we will pull the feed with the stories. I'm then going to create an instance of the date and the time, and this returns epoch time in milliseconds. And I will use that simply to create a span of time during which I will not fetch the stories again, because we can get banned by the server. And so I will only do it, I believe I made it every 6 hours or every 12 hours. So as you can see, after that, we have here the same thing we did before, where we are simply creating a route for get. This is the request at the base of the address that we are going to create. I then create or check the difference of time between the time when the service was created and the current time when this request is made. If the difference is bigger than the time I've determined, I then go into the conditional statement, and as you can see here, the feed parser module can reach out using the URL we gave it and pull back all of those feeds. I then take all of them and return them, as you can see here, response.send, to the client that is making the request. Now, if we are outside of the cache or within the cache that we are creating, we simply go into the else statement and we return the cache. As you can see here, we set the cache in the very first time that we run through that application. We then set a port, and in this case, in addition to listening, we're writing a small message to the console. We're also writing to the console whether we got a cache hit or we got a cache miss. So that's at a pretty high level the application. It's pretty basic application that simply grabs the feed, puts it into JSON, and returns it to the client. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this, and I will add it to the Linux machine, the one that you see here on the console. And so I will enter the name of the nano editor, and then I will enter the name of the file, which will be index.js. I will paste that code here, go ahead and save the file, take a look and make sure that was written, and indeed it has. If we take a look at the files, you can see there that we have index.js. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen, and now I will run that code. And as you can see there, we should get the message, and we see server running on port 3080. So I'm going to bring back the browser window. I will change the port to 3080, and when I hit return, if all works well, we should be able to see the New York Times stories. And so let me make the font smaller here so we can see them. There should be 30 or so of them, and you can see there all of the detail that's coming back from all of those stories, and that we have a long page of content. And as you can see here, we got a cache miss, and if we hit it again, we got a cache hit. That means that all subsequent requests within that window of 6 hours will no longer hit the New York Times service, but will simply pull from the cache that we have within our NodeJS application. So we have a service up and running, and that's pretty good. However, if you log out of this account, you will no longer have the service up and running. In order to do that, you can install another module that in fact will create a daemon within the Linux OS, so that you can continue to invoke this even though you're not logged in. So let's go ahead and do that next. I'm going to go ahead and stop the server, and the package that we're going to install is called PM2. And so we're going to install it same as we did before with the other modules, except in this case we will use sudo simply to give it the authorization that it needs. npm install -g for global, and then the name of the module, which is PM2. Now that we have installed the module, we can go ahead and fire it up. We'll do PM2 start, the name of the code that we want to have running, -i 0, and the name that we want to give it. In this case, we'll enter NYT, hit return, and as you can see there, there's a number of processes that are being started, and in this case, it is instantiating one per cluster, as you can see there. And if we enter the command PM2 list, we can see there all of the instances that are running. In this case, we have 4 cores, so there's 4 instances, and the load balancing will be done by the service as well. Now, if we go ahead and exit from the machine, you can see there that I'm back on my machine. It says they're simply able. And if I go ahead and reload the application, that application is still running. Now, if you're curious about how to watch and monitor those messages that we entered, that we were watching at the command line, we can go ahead and do that. Let me log back into the machine. Now that I'm back in, all I have to do is enter PM2 logs. And as you can see there, it gives you the messages that were written to the console, and you can also use it interactively. So if I keep on reloading the page here, you can see that we get a bunch of misses until all of the cores are instantiating, and after that, we continue to get cache hits. So as you can see, this is a pretty useful service, and we've written within a few minutes something that can be used globally, that can be used even after you log out of the machine, and you can reuse this in a number of ways. So with that, I will wrap it up and say goodbye.